is Saturday, January 13th, 2018. We are in Season 3, Episode 2. Our show can be found around the web at wolfman.com, barefootbushcraft.com, aroundthecabin.com, Freedomizer Radio, Canadian Preppers Network, Prepper Survival Homestead, American Prepper Network, survivalcentral.net, iTunes, and many other fine websites. I'm your host, the Wolfman, and of course I'm joined again by my lovely co-host, Tori.
Hi.
So in today's episode, we're going to talk about some unusually warm weather in the Ontario, Canada area. We're going to talk about dressing in layers. We're going to talk about a man who sued the city because he fell by a waterfall. And of course, speak to our special guest, adventurer and motivational speaker, Jamie Clarke. So we'll get started today. We are here in the southern Ontario area where it is green outside. There's almost no snow anywhere. Temperatures are over 18 degrees Celsius. Tori and I were out and about today, and there are girls in flip-flops wandering around. It is now, there's no snow to race our sled dogs. And of course, as we record this broadcast, we are surrounded by our beautiful babies. We have a bunch of sled dogs. We have 3 that we own and care for, and we have 1 foster dog that is here for the winter season so she can learn the art of sledding. And don't forget, we also have our honorary husky known as Magic, a little service dog that Tori has, who is a Jack Russell Terrier. So anyways, let's get on with the show today. So our first segment is Mail Call.
Heads here! Listen up! It's time for Mail Call!
You can connect with us around the web, lots of different ways. We encourage people to tweet us at BF Bushcraft. You can message us on Facebook. You can send us information, pictures, and such on Instagram. And you can call us at 1-866-248-1362, and we'll play your voicemail on the air. And of course, don't forget about my favorite, Google+. Let's get right to it here. We have Jordan Howard has messaged us through our YouTube channel. Barefoot Bushcraft, new episode. What? Sweet. So, thank you very much for that. We do appreciate all the great comments. And of course, the show is back for the 2018 season. And we do appreciate you listening, Jordan Howard. That's awesome. Thank you very much. So normally this time of year at Barefoot Bushcraft, we are busy with the usual things, archery and children's programs and axe throwing and cross-country skiing and dog sledding. But this year, as of yet, like the last couple of years, we've had not enough snow for dog sledding and cross-country skiing, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it may or may not change. Of course, archery, axe throwing, and all the children's programs we run at community centers and around the area, they're still running strong. So we're going to move on to our next segment now, which is...
In the news.
Mississauga man is suing the city of Hamilton following a serious waterfall accident. This is from insaga.com. This man, Corey Dixon, is 23-year-old motivational speaker and YouTube actor, is suing the city for $392,000 for pain, suffering, and loss of enjoyment of life after plummeting off a cliff at Albion Falls, a popular Hamilton destination for hikers, sightseers, and nature lovers alike. Apparently, in February 27th, 2016, Dixon visited the falls with some friends in the early morning hours. After parking his car, he walked toward the staircase that the statement says was not gated or fenced off, but featured insufficient and inadequate lighting. According to the statement, Dixon descended the staircase but decided to turn around at the bottom because he felt the conditions were unsafe. When he turned around, he reportedly fell and continued to slide to the edge of the falls before falling off the cliff and landing on the rocks near the river. The statement goes on to say Dixon laid on the rocks for over 90 minutes and developed hypothermia as a result. And the statement goes on, as a result of the fall, Corey suffered serious and permanent injuries. He said he spent the next 6 months recovering in hospital, fighting to use my left arm, learning how to walk again, and suffering through horrible anxiety, depression, and PTSD following the trauma. He also had a GoFundMe page, not sure if that's still up, that was launched to raise funds for a service dog for Dixon because he broke 30 bones. Apparently, he destroyed his left arm, ruptured his aorta, and sustained a severe back injury during this fall. The lawsuit says the defendants are jointly and severely liable for Corey's damages and breach their duty of care under the Occupiers Liability Act. Although fencing and warning signs can be found at Albion Falls, falls and rope rescues are common. Dixon goes on to say, I know how lucky I am to be alive, and I've worked tremendously hard to be able to walk again, but my road to recovery isn't over yet. Lots of hard work and dedication remains until I can fully get back to my pre-accident capacity.
Wow. Interesting article. That's, I know there's a little bit more to it there.
That's basically, it names a few other people in the lawsuit, but we really don't need to go into all that.
Wow. So we can start as adventurers. You know, Tori and I have both been to Albion Falls a couple times over the years. Beautiful place. So, you know, as you, our listeners, we want to sort of dissect this article and talk a little bit about what's happened. Now, obviously, this person, he's 23 years old, so he's fairly young, you know, by the grand scheme of things. He is, you know, so he's an adult. He says he is a motivational speaker. You know, I'm not sure what experiences he speaks about because I haven't seen any of his things. So he goes down and he sees an area that's unsafe, but he continues anyways. And then he continued a little too far, slipped over the edge, and I mean those injuries are quite severe. Broken 30 bones in his body, sustained some heart damage. That's some pretty serious stuff. What is interesting about this article is now multiple years later. What year did you say this was written? 2000. He was injured in 2016.
Yes.
Yes.
And this article is dated January 4th, 2018.
So he's taken, for whatever reason, he's taken a bunch of years to do this. He's got himself a GoFundMe campaign. I don't understand the whole point of suing the city because the conditions were unsafe. When you go out into nature, whether it's a backpacking trip, whether it's a trip to a city park, you are responsible for your own safety. These waterfalls are dangerous areas if you're not properly, if you don't, I wouldn't say properly equipped, but if you're not properly prepared to go in them.
Correct.
If they're icy, you have to be careful. If they, there's always dangers everywhere. Many of you, our listeners, and myself as well, you slip, you fall, you fly all over the place. Injuries happen. I mean, if you go out into the woods, you are taking that risk on. There needs to be a certain amount of personal responsibility about that.
Yeah, when I go hiking, because I have a bad ankle injury from other things, nothing to do with hiking, I always make sure I have 2 poles. So basically that means I have 4, like a dog, I have 4 paws on the ground.
That's right. And that is simply because you don't want to end up falling over a waterfall. I don't understand the reason that this individual wants to sue the city or what the city could do to make this situation safer. I mean, does he expect all natural areas to be gated and fenced, waterfalls to be, to be warning water going over a cliff? There seems to be a huge trend in society, and perhaps because the internet is inundated with Americanism, we see a huge trend in the United States of removing responsibility from the self and putting it on somebody else, the park owners, whatever. Even in the outdoor industry that we work in, we see that all the time where injuries are always passed on to someone else rather than say, hey, I shouldn't have gone there. I fell over the cliff. I got injured. Horrible things have happened to me.
But it's my fault because I did something that I shouldn't have done.
I mean,
or not be prepared.
Absolutely. I mean, as a dog musher, we mush the dogs. So Tori joins me many times. We mush the dogs. if something tragic were to happen, like, I don't know, the sled were to fly in the canal and we were to fall through and a dog were to drown, that's not the fault of the canal system. Those trails are there for public use. It's our responsibility to say, okay, our dogs need to be safe, we need to be safe, don't go out on the ice, whatever, all the situation that would create that to occur. I don't know, what would you say to that, Tori?
Oh, I totally agree that we're getting away from personal responsibility and forcing it onto other people, corporations, cities, and just not taking the personal responsibility of actually being an adult and being responsible.
I couldn't agree with that more, and I don't understand, and I truly hope, although I understand the gentleman's injuries are very severe, life-changing, certainly something that as he gets past this, he will be able to add to his motivational speaker. Now, to speak to this, we had a lady on our show last week, of course, and she was Karen Dark, and she was in a climbing accident. She lost her feeling from basically from her underarms down. So that was in the first season 3, episode 1, so just last week. And what did she do? She picked herself up. I'm sure she went through the depression and all the horrible things that go through. Went on to win a gold medal. Nothing in our article said that she sued the park for her tragic, and it truly was tragic, her mountaineering accident. She just gone on with it and made herself significantly better. Unfortunately, you can't go through life and expect everything, especially when you go into the woods, you go into wilderness, mountainous, scuba, whatever environments, and expect nothing to happen, right? You're going into an uncontrolled environment, not the fake environment of our cities and our electric heating in the house and everything is all climate controlled. You're going into the unknown. And you need to be prepared for that. And even though it may appear as it's a normal conservation area, city park, you look down and there's a couple of meters waterfall there. There's always a possibility of falling and getting injured. And personally, and this is just simply sheer my opinion, I don't think it's the city's responsibility. If he's going there, and it says it was dark in the article, and it says...
Well, it said early morning hours.
Early morning. So
there's probably some lighting.
Yeah. Wouldn't you think it would be your responsibility to carry a head torch? You can get them at the dollar store. So you should be able to see all of this stuff.
And I think that as we're raising the next generation, we're not using the same common sense that Wolf and I had when we were raised.
And we see this. We see this in the outdoor programs that we run, that young people are removed from the outdoors. And that removal from the outdoors, and you're not allowed to go out and play, you're not allowed to go out and experiment and have fun, and use nature as a way to...
Like learn how to climb trees and get dirty, covered in mud, things like that. And
that kind of activity when you're young translates into safer activities when you get older. Now, Albion Falls, just for those of you who are, anywhere in the world that you're not near the falls, not near the Hamilton area, the Albion Falls it's a pretty big fall, actually. It's 62.32 feet for our American friends, and 19 meters is the height of that. That's a long fall. Now, it's the type of waterfall is it's got little, it's not straight. It goes down into, I don't know what the exact type would be, but it goes down, then it goes out a little bit, then it goes down, then it goes out a little bit.
So basically it kind of has ledges or...
Oh, I'm sorry. So the proper term for that is a cascade waterfall. That's the proper name for it. So, he took quite the tumble. And like I said, we've been there a bunch of times, but generally speaking, we always make sure conditions are safe, or if they're unsafe, we are prepared for that. If it's ice, we are prepared for ice with crampons. We are prepared with hobnailed shoes, things like that, hiking poles. And if we get injured in that environment, it is, at least from our perspective, it is not something that I would blame the city for, because accidents happen no matter where you go. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, since he was out with his friends in the early morning hours of February 27th, 2016. I can't exactly remember what the weather conditions were like, but they were probably was very little snow, so he might have just had running shoes on instead of hiking boots. So, proper footwear is very important. If he'd had sneakers on, yeah, he would slip on little patches of ice if they're still there. Hiking boots, maybe not as much.
But these mistakes can happen anywhere. One of the guests at our radio show, in the future, she will be talking about her experiences in Everest, and she was saying that when she was on the mountain, this climber came out in the middle of the night, and he had to go to the bathroom. So what he did was he just got out of his tent because, it's cold, it's miserable. You don't want to go outside, especially on Everest. He goes outside and he didn't put his ice crampons on. He went outside, took a few steps away from his tent. He slipped, he fell, and he basically went over the edge of a huge cliff, never to be seen again. Simple things. This is a very similar parody in that if you're going into these environments, you need to be properly prepared and properly dressed. And, yes, it's a park. Yes, it's it's quite frequented by people, but you still need to think, if I'm going into an ice environment, what's there that I can get hurt on, right? So it's something to always consider. So please be careful out there, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you're always prepared. There's enough tutorials on the internet, YouTube, wherever you go on crossing ice passages, and just generally being careful. And again, if it looks unsafe, it probably is. If you're not experienced, don't go down there.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right, and I guess with that, we will go on to our next segment, which is...
Tips and tricks.
All right, so today we're going to talk about some of the great weather that we've been having here in the Niagara region. Again, like we'd said earlier, we went from a couple of days ago, minus 18, 19, 20 degrees Celsius, to today, plus 18 Celsius. Girls in flip-flops running around the mall. It's been glorious. Of course, as humans, most of us, not all of course, are built to absolutely love the warm weather. It's very uplifting. The green grass, it's very beautiful for us. We just love it. The sunshine. It just makes you feel alive, right? Although many people, they like the cold. I'm not in that category by any means.
Only for dog mushing.
Just for mushing. That's right. So, the question, of course, is, and perhaps this can allude to our previous story about Mr. Dixon, is how do you dress for that? So you get up in the morning and it's fairly cold, 5-6 degrees Celsius. It goes on to the day, it's 18-19 degrees Celsius. Then, of course, tonight it's going to go down again to around the freezing mark. So it's very, very challenging to... most people, they have these big, thick, heavy winter parkas, ourselves as well. The old Canada Goose parka, the military Peerless parka, and you wear those, but there's a problem with that. You have your thin shirt on, you put your big parka on, you start doing physical exercise, and then all of a sudden, whoop, it's up to 14, 15 degrees.
And you're starting to cook.
You're going to cook. Now, Les Stroud says, he has a very simple theory, you sweat, you die. Basically, to explain that a little bit, you overheat, you start to sweat, and then that moisture is going to get in your clothes. It's going to stay in your clothes, and then you're going to get cold. As soon as it gets cold, now that can even cause frost, right? I'm sure many of you... Or hypothermia, which then puts you into a danger zone. So the old way that we used to do things before we had all these technical fabrics was you put your regular street clothes on, and then you put your ski pants on, which are insulated coverall type pants. You put your heavy jacket on, you head out into the woods. Problem is, again, you're gonna overheat. So the new system, and this is new relatively speaking, it's been around, 30 years or something, is what's called layering. So all the different outdoor equipment places, whatever your favorite local one is in your area, will have all this equipment. So you start with what's called a base layer, right? And that most base layers today are made out of a material called polypropylene, and that is like basically, for lack of a better term, it's your long underwear. So you put your long underwear on, and that way what that's designed to do is to wick moisture away from your body. So again, you sweat. it pulls the sweat through the fabric and pushes it into your mid layer. So you've got your long underwear on, and then you put like, I don't know, your pair of pants on or whatever it is you're going to wear, right? So you put that on, and then that ends up being a little bit of an insulative layer, a little bit of a wear layer, right? And then on top of that, you put your shirt, and then you can put a sweater on, but make sure you don't have the old style like a actual sweater, because what happens with the sweat in sweater is it will start to make you warm. You want to have something that has a zip up to it, right? So you have your base layer, then you have like a red button-up shirt, and then you have a zip-up hoodie type thing.
Something breathable would be good too.
Yeah, a lot of new fabrics are now all breathable. Even the fleece stuff is breathable now, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you'll go with, that's when you put your heavier layer on, right? So you're going to put your thicker, like your outerwear, what's also called a shell jacket. So your jacket on top. So that's going to have some insulative properties to it. It's going to be, some of the higher end ones are a little bit breathable, right? And that's going to keep you to around 0 degrees. You're going to stay warm just wearing that. Probably a little colder, probably -8, -9, depending on your body type. But the thing is, in an environment like today, you start out and you have all those layers on. You're walking through the woods for a day hike or whatever, and now it starts to warm up. So with the multiple layers, you can start by opening your heavy jacket, right? Your outer layer, your outer jacket. You can open your shell up, and then you keep trucking. And then if that starts to get hot, then you can unzip your other one, right? And then if that happens, you can unbutton your shirt and you still have your base layer on. So now you've got all your layers open. You've got some air moving around, air to try to remove to wick the moisture, to get some cool air in there, all sorts of stuff. You got, what do you think about that?
I think that's definitely the way to go. I usually have to wear a little bit more than Wolf does because I'm a lot smaller. I'm very small, under 5 feet, 100 pounds. So I usually have to wear a little bit more warmer stuff because when it's colder, I get cold very easily.
And it also depends, it's important to know your own body. For example, I know where I get cold, and where I get cold is not where somebody else gets cold. I'm one of those rare people, my feet never get cold. So I don't wear insulated boots. It can go down to -45 outside, mushing dogs in the backcountry in the wilderness, and literally a pair of moccasins with with something to keep the moisture out, and my feet won't get cold. Whereas a regular person would do that, you're going to get cold, you're going to get the frostbite, you're going to lose the toes, right? Generally speaking, I find for me, my chest area gets very, very cold fastest. So I'll throw on like a wool shirt, right, which has really amazing insulative properties. Even when wet, it'll have good insulative properties, and then a vest over top of that. And that's sort of my layering. So I have my under clothes on and my long underwear, polypropylene. Then I'll have a shirt on over top of that, like a wool shirt. Then I'll throw a vest on, right? So that way I can change all those layers up. And again, my legs and my arms and certainly my feet don't get cold, but that's my personal layering system. But my head gets cold all the time. So you rarely see me without a ski mask. As soon as it gets a little cold, I have a hat and or a ski mask on. So what about yourself, Tori? I know you have a totally different layering system than that.
Yeah, well, I always have my base layer, and then I'll have a heavier shirt and jacket. But I always find that my arms and legs get the coldest faster, so I always make sure that I don't like vests because obviously they're not going to keep my arms warm. So I just make sure that my arms and legs are warm, and then I'm good to go.
Very cool. All right, so on that, we would like to thank you all for listening. We are going to take a short break, and then we are going to get on to our special guest of the week, which is Jamie Clarke, who is an adventurer, Mount Everest climber, and motivational speaker. Now, again, you can connect with us if you have any commentary on the show, good, bad, or indifferent. We want to hear from you. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google+. Or, of course, you can call us 866-248-1362, and then we will play your voicemail on the next episode. I want to thank you very much, and we'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Robert Suter from Survival Central Limited. Check out our two great prepper survival websites. For the beginner, survivalcentral.ca, and for the advanced, more extreme prepper, prepperextreme.com. Be prepared, stay safe, and survive.
So welcome back to the second half of the Barefoot Bushcraft Radio Show. Today I have my special guest, Jamie Clarke, who is a Canadian adventurer and presenter. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so if you wouldn't mind just telling us a bit about yourself.
Well, at the risk of sounding like some cheesy braggart, I'm born and raised in Canada, out here in Calgary, next to the Canadian Rockies. And I guess like a lot of young Canadian lads, I had a dream of playing hockey, but my mom thought it too dangerous and violent, so she suggested I become an adventurer instead. I don't think she imagined I would take it to the extent that I've tried to, because mountains turn out to be pretty dangerous in their own way, but at least they're not violent, my mom would say. So growing up out here, I became fascinated with mountain travel and just the outdoors in general, and was particularly inspired by books about exploration and adventure. Historic tales or more modern ones. One that you might even know of that caused me some great inspiration was a book called Paddle to the Amazon, about a father and son who paddled, as the title would say, to the Amazon from Winnipeg, Manitoba. And they just struck me as particularly courageous and interesting fellas, a father and son team. And I saw myself in those pages and thought, hey, maybe I could live a life of adventure. And one thing led to another. And I've never really had a job. I've spent my whole life self-employed as an entrepreneur and as an adventurer of sorts. And I've traveled around the world, climbed the 7 summits, a couple trips up Mount Everest, a ride across the empty quarter in Arabia on camels. And now I run a little company called liveoutthere.com and make outdoor apparel to support adventures. So that's kind of the adventure background. I'm married and a couple of kids, dogs, guinea pigs. More information than you'd want, or your listeners would care, but that's my story.
That's really cool. My favorite, thinking of paddle, my favorite book and movie growing up was Paddle to the Sea. I don't know if you ever watched or heard of that. That was always my favorite.
Right.
Okay, you say business is a great adventure. Tell us about that.
Well, hi, Tori. Yeah, business for me, at least in my own experience, I think I began to understand, and it's taken me years to figure it out, but for a long time I thought the things that you learn, say, on the side of a mountain or in the backcountry, were exclusive to that environment, that they were, as much as some people tried, the learnings weren't very translatable. But over time, running my own business, I had a bricks and mortar retail store in downtown Calgary for 14 years. I've been running an e-commerce company for 8. We're in our 9th year now. Our company has grown and expanded and contracted to as many as 50 more and plus employees. So we've had a good little operation running, and I found almost on a daily basis that the lessons that I learned leading an expedition have been directly applicable to leading a company. And I think the reality is when you're on the side of a mountain or in a difficult situation and people's lives are at stake, it's not all that much different than in business where people's livelihoods are at stake. And the lessons learned on the side of a mountain can be very applicable to what you have to do in a boardroom. And that really makes me think then that ultimately one's career should be adventurous. We should take risks. We should, in our careers, whether we work in a small company or a big company, or want to do an entrepreneurial effort, we need to analyze the risk. We need to understand the competition, factors beyond our control, government regulation or the weather. There's wonderful analogies, and it just feels like life as a whole should be a grand adventure, and our careers should be as well, not just our recreation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's a really fascinating way to look at business and entrepreneurial skills. Of course, Tori and I run an outdoor organization called Barefoot Bushcraft. We teach like archery and outdoor adventure stuff, children's camps, and that's a really interesting way to look at it. I really like that.
I love that you're doing that, and I think that when you can combine something that you're passionate about and make it a career, there's pros and cons to that. You can suck the joy out of a recreation by turning it into a business, but at the same time, you can also add a great joy and passion to it. So I think you have to find the right balance, but it sounds like that's your pursuit, and that's certainly one that I've dedicated for my life.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So I really love that parallel in that. Now, on your website, you say that you have faced death many times. Can you tell us about that? Like, what's been the scariest near death for you?
That's probably some hyperbolic marketing speak you've jumped across. I think we've all faced death at numerous times when you jump on the highway and head out to the backcountry. I was just recently driving in a snowstorm from Lake Louise to Banff, and I think it's probably more dangerous than climbing a frozen waterfall in the middle of winter. Risk is relative. And so we probably all faced it more often than we want. But I have been in a couple of situations where I think there's sort of two kinds of dangerous moments. One is the kind that builds up over a period of time where maybe you make less than perfect decisions. I think with a lot of backcountry accidents or problems, in my experience, it's not one moment, but a series of moments that lead up to a problem. Maybe you got out of your car too late. Your start was too late. Maybe, you had a gear malfunction 2 hours in, and that put you behind schedule even more. Maybe you decided to push a little later into the day than you should have. Often I think when a dangerous moment occurs, it's a collection of decisions that could have gone better that led you to the situation that you're in. Transversely, the other kind is that moment when you're, in the world of climbing, you're climbing up some icy couloir, and you've started early to keep the temperature low and make sure the sun isn't on the face so you don't have to worry about rockfall, but out of the blue, a rock is dislodged, and it's the size of a basketball, and it whips by and misses your head by 2 feet. That's just a function of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and luckily on that occasion you were 2 feet to the right or 2 feet to the left, and nothing bad happened. I think both of those situations it's important for people who want to spend time in the backcountry, in the bush, to be aware about the dangers that we do face. And I think often, a slip on a log crossing an icy river, these things can add up very quickly to a problem. So I think we've all faced situations that could have caused our death more frequently than perhaps we're aware. And just because of the nature of some of the stuff I've done, I've bumped into those things. And I've had altitude sickness, for example, pulmonary and cerebral edema at 24,000 feet on Mount Everest on its north side in Tibet, and kept climbing up to 26,000 feet when I should have turned around. And that made it a little bit of difficulty to get back down. So I think that's the wonderful thing about life, is that death is a lot closer than we think, and therefore we should live well.
Okay, that's great. How does your wife feel about your adventures?
Well, I'm very lucky. My wife is very adventurous in her own way. She's a tremendous athlete, and she can out-hike me at times, and she frequently, pretty much always out mountain bikes me, especially on the climbing. I'll pass her on the downhill only because I'm fat and slightly crazy, but she out climbs me constantly. So I would say that she's very supportive about it, and we've been doing it. We've been we were friends for several years before we started dating, and we've been married for over 20 years now. And we have a very similar approach to life, that in small ways and in big ways, life is an adventure without sounding cheesy. And she's always been very supportive and very participatory. We climbed Mount Denali together in Alaska, just the two of us on our in the early spring. And that was a fabulous trip. We've climbed, mountain biked and skied all over together. And so we share that. I think when we became parents, that changed a bit for her, where her perception of risk shifted more dramatically than mine. I'm still suffering from, being a selfish adventurer at times, and I have to keep myself in check. And that causes a little stress in the relationship, because I'm like, yeah, sure, I can run off for 3 months to the Himalaya for a climb. And Barb will be thinking, are you nuts? So it does cause some stress at times, probably in part because I'm unrealistic about things. But she's right there, shoulder to shoulder, in the thick of it.
That's really cool. So now, obviously, you said your wife joins you on some of these adventures. So what's the favorite adventure that you guys have gone on as a couple?
We took our kids to Nepal when they were 7 and 9 years old and spent a month trekking in the Khumbu. And I think that has to be fundamentally the most wonderful adventure experience we've ever shared. Now, the trek for us, we'd done it many, many times. We'd led groups. We'd been up and down the valley previously. But to go there with your family, to go there with your children, was really fascinating for two reasons. One, normally when you head off into the backcountry, you have to say goodbye to the people you love to go say hello to the place you love or the places you love. Then after your trip, whether it's just a weekend or maybe if you're lucky it's a week, or maybe even more fortunate, it could be months, you have to then say goodbye to this beautiful places that you visit in the backcountry to return to the people you love. And which is wonderful. In fact, often you want that break and you miss them. But I've always found that hard because, I'm in the place doing the thing I love, missing the people I loved, or at home with people I love, missing the thing I love. I'm sorry, it sounds almost like a circular discussion here, but to go with our family to the mountains in Nepal and trek together, it was like, wow, the people I love are right here. The place I love is where we currently are. I couldn't have been happier. So I think for us, that was such a significant experience. And it's still today now, 8 years later, is a touch point for our family and our experience and the bonding. Second to that, probably that Denali trip as a couple out there in pretty harsh conditions. We had some pretty bad weather and storms, and we were alone on the mountain. So that was maybe the most formidable, enjoyable from a gritty perspective. But head and shoulders above anything we've ever done was that trip with our children.
That's really cool that you have the opportunity to take your family and children out into the woods.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an important part, particularly today, without jumping on a soapbox. I'm in a technology business. I love my iPhone. I love my smartphone. I'm surrounded as I talk to you by monitors and computers, and I have a Polar V800 on my wrist. I like to track elevation gain and speed and heart rate and distance. However, being so surrounded by technology, I worry about our society as a whole. We're quite sedentary. Netflix is awesome, but it's also terrible. It's killing us. It's wonderfully entertaining, but it's addictive, and every show ends in a cliffhanger and the next one starts, and you sit on the couch for a lot longer than you should. And I just think for younger generations of kids, I see it in my own kids, with their Snapchat and the connectedness that they have in their community, it's hard for them to leave Wi-Fi behind. And that's why I think it's growingly important obviously you share the same passion, and hopefully so do your listeners, and maybe some listeners who aren't passionate about it. It's important to get our families away from Wi-Fi, let the batteries on their phones die, put them in their pack and forget about them for a few days, and spend some analog time together. moving and existing outside without digital distraction.
I couldn't agree more. And, we see that a lot. As I was saying, Tori and I host a summer camp, and we've done it for quite a number of years now. And the changes in the children that come, when we get very, very much city-bred and born children, and they come to our camp, by the end of the week, it's usually it's a day camp, so they're only there for 5 days, but we see these huge changes from these, I'm afraid to get dirty, and oh my goodness, to, they're ripping their socks and shoes off when they arrive, and they're jumping in the pond, and they're getting all slinging mud at each other, and it really is a very beneficial thing for young people to see the world outside of the screen.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, kudos to you, my brother, because that's, you're preaching the gospel, and I love it.
Okay. Would you ever want your children to live your life of adventure?
Yes. I think when they were younger, I was more terrified, and I would say, no, you're going to play hockey and stay home, because it is dangerous. It is a dangerous world, and I could feel myself becoming a helicopter parent, which flies, dramatically in the face of how I was brought up. It flies dramatically in the face of our family's values. But as a parent, I was just, terrified for their well-being, the physical well-being. But I think I have to anyway, remind myself of the emotional well-being. And, just keeping my kids in my house where I can keep an eye on them. Yes, they're physically protected. But what's the emotional damage? And I had to find I don't know, what is it? It's just the ability as a parent to let go a little bit, to communicate with them, to teach them, to get them well informed, but then encourage them to be thoughtful in their risk taking and to take some risks, to go outside. And so it's not an easy answer, but 100%. If my children, and when they were younger, they were very keen on all the outdoor activity. They're teenagers now, 17 and 14, and pretty much everything that I suggest is met with resistance. Want a mountain bike? No. Want to go backcountry skiing? No. Do you want to go for a trail run? No. But my wife and I know that they're great skiers, they're great bikers. They understand mountain travel and something of bushcraft. Maybe in their 20s, they'll come back around to appreciate it. So yes, full stop. If they would love to follow it, I would be honored to share what I know and to cheer them on and revel in their experiences.
That's really cool. I know one of the instrumental people in the outdoor education movement. His name is Mark Morey, and he runs an organization down in the United States. And he always said, when I've been to many of his talks, he's like, yes, I'm always telling kids, like, let your kids run around and let them climb trees. He's like, then it's my kid out there stepping on thorns, and he's 30 feet up the tree, and I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna die.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. It's natural. I think, for sure. But I think we can find that balance. And it's as good for our kids as it is for us. And I think one of the things that taught me a lot was when I became a parent, the first concern was, oh, that's it. My life's over. I got to be a parent now. My adventuring, climbing buddies were like, oh, dude, how could you do that, man? You just ruined everything. And it's actually been the opposite. I've actually found myself more passionate about staying true to my dreams and goals, staying true to our lifestyle choices, about the values, because they're watching. And I want them to be able to see a dad who's living passionately, who's willing to fail, but who's willing to stand by what he believes is important. And maybe if it's in fashion or not, doesn't matter. We're going to do this. And I take great inspiration out of from being a dad and from my kids about living well.
That's really inspiring for all the parents out there, because we hear that a lot. Oh, I used to camp and I used to hike in backcountry and tarp and all this. Then they have children and now they're camping out of a minivan. So that's really awesome and inspiring.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that you had climbed Mount Everest. Of course, that is one of the, many people's dreams and goals in life, to climb the highest mountain. You've done it several times. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience?
I was very lucky to, I've been on 4 Everest expeditions and twice to its summit. So I've been very, very fortunate to have had that opportunity. I worked hard at it, no doubt, but at the same time, very grateful, particularly in the early years. I was first on Everest in 1991, a long time ago, when I was in my early 20s. And I'm still to this day eternally grateful for the people who gave me that chance and invited me on the expedition. And that really solidified for me that experience. Although our team didn't make it to the summit, that we were climbing on the North Face. And that really solidified me that no matter what my life would entail, I was going to pursue this life of adventure. And it was an intersection, really, because I had decided at that point, well, I might have to live a very modest life in material means, but it's going to be rich in experience. And that mantra was one that Barb and I, my wife and I, continue to this day. It's like, how do we live our lives as rich as possible in experience? And I don't mean in just sort of greedy, hedonistic experience. There's a place for a margarita and a warm, sunny day, but not much room for that. I'm talking about, rich, meaningful experiences with nature, with struggle, with fear, with distant cultures, with awkward language, with each other, with kind of those dark portions of our own personality. That's the kind of richness we were seeking. And Everest, boy, it is a wonderful stage on which to have that experience, for certain. Now, the nature of climbing on Everest has changed dramatically, for certain, but it's a worthy goal for anyone. And if any of your listeners were keen to do it, I would encourage them wholeheartedly. And I would also caution them to take the time to do it well, to be well prepared, to climb, to log hundreds and hundreds of hours in the backcountry and in the mountains, climbing other peaks, to A, just manage the risk, but B, to truly learn the craft of high altitude expedition efforts. So after that first trip where we didn't make it, we went back 3 years later and tried to climb without blood oxygen and didn't make it again. It's fairly heartbreaking. But it's one thing to fail, but it's something else to fold, right? To quit, to give up. So we tried again 3 years later, and were rewarded on that third attempt with cooperative weather, and we made it to the top. And then 8 years ago, I went back for a second time. So I, whether you're the first or 10,000th to climb Everest, I think it's a worthy experience, and I wish people, nothing but the best trying it. But I just caution them to be well prepared and thoughtful about the pursuit.
Okay, so one of the quotes from one of my favorite movies, a gentleman in the movie, it was a Jurassic Park movie, said he climbed a mountain and he was asked, why did he go up there to die? And he said, I didn't. I went up there to live. Is that how you feel?
I don't know that quote, or was that the original Jurassic Park?
No, I believe it's the second one.
Oh, it was the second one. Yeah, I'll have to go back and take a peek at it. Yes, I get that makes sense. I guess that resonates. I don't think one necessarily has to, at least this is my experience, you don't necessarily have to risk your life to feel alive by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, I don't really subscribe to that philosophy. I like to do things that just happen to be risky. And I guess if you removed all of the risk, you would take away not any of the joy, but some of the accountability. And one of the things I like about that accountability when the stakes are high is it requires a sort of total concentration. It's a very meditative process, I think. When you're fully engaged in doing something that happens to be dangerous, there's no room for any other thought or distractions. And that's peaceful. Well, maybe it sounds counterintuitive, but when you're focused and you're working hard and you are in that flow state, as the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi wrote in his book Flow, when you get into that flow, it's a magical meditative thing. And that's what I'm searching for. That's what I enjoy. That's where I tap into some deep kinds of energy. It's not a thrill-seeking thing that I need proximity to death to feel alive. Maybe that's for some folks. That's just not for me.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Now, I could talk to you about Everest all day because, I love mountaineering and all that sort of thing. But they say that Mount Everest is, obviously one of the coldest places due to its elevation and stuff like that. So could you possibly describe the cold that you went through when you do these treks? Obviously, you're using oxygen or not using oxygen. What's the physical experience of being in that environment like?
I think in any environment, whether it was in the Himalaya or in Antarctica or downtown Edmonton in a windstorm in February, you need a couple of things. One, you need to be properly nourished to manage the cold. So the short answer to your question is, it can be quite reasonable. It can be quite good, actually. You can be quite comfortable, but you need the right gear. You need to be fueled properly. So that means you need proper hydration and calories on board. You need to be fit. And the reason you need to be fit is because with good fitness comes improved circulation and efficiency. And it helps if you're moving. If you're running into trouble in the cold, you've got to get moving to fire up the engine and get moving. So I think when you have good systems, you have good nutrition, and you have good gear, you can actually be quite comfortable in very, very cold environments. That said, you get strung out at high altitude and you don't hydrate properly because you've run out of fuel and you can't melt snow. You're eating some protein bar between two of you over 3 days. Now you don't have the calories because you're rationing. You're going to find yourself in trouble, and it becomes very scary, actually. I find in the moments that I've courted hypothermia or been in tricky cold, it sneaks up on you, and it's quite scary. And then it becomes paralyzing. You lose your dexterity, not only physically but mentally. You can't process and think. Knots that you're accustomed to tying quickly, you struggle. Your fingers become dumb. You start to lose all your feeling. And then over time, you begin to kind of lose your will. You want to sit down and take a break, which is the opposite of what you need to do. Cold can sneak in, and once it robs you of your feeling, then you think, oh, actually, I'm not doing so badly anymore. I don't feel so cold. It's because your feet are freezing, and you're starting to lose your feeling. So, and then it can, sneak around, and then you become lethargic. And when that sets in, wow, you just disappear into some sort of dream. The moments that I've been deep in that kind of cold, I've had these little dreams of sort of partial asleep, awake dream that I'm at home in front of a fire, curled up under a blanket, listening to some jazz, sipping some scotch. And that's when you slip away and die. So I think to a point, good gear. That's why I launched Live Out There, not to make some shameless business plug, but that's what I've never bought a piece of gear that I didn't tweak in one way or another, change or fix or update. And I found a lot of the gear is always so expensive. I remember being younger and just almost resentful of the cost. You go into a gear shop and you'd be salivating over a beautiful piece of gear, and it's like, my God, that's like 2 months rent for me. I can't afford that. Good gear doesn't have to be ridiculously expensive, and that's the mission of our company, but to make that good gear more available to more people. But again, it can be really miserable for sure, but with the right gear, nutrition, movement, you can be quite pleasant. Transversely, the heat is the opposite. I spent some time riding camels across the empty quarter in Arabia. Got up to 52 degrees, man, the heat. You can only take off so many clothes. I'd much rather die in the cold than in the heat.
That's funny. A buddy of mine, he always says, you can only get so comfortable in the hot before it's illegal.
Yeah, totally.
And it's interesting about gear. Certainly in anything to do with bushcraft and outdoor stuff, gear is usually a huge thing, right? Even the minimal gear people always talk about building your own gear, modifying your own gear. That's sort of something I could really talk to you for the whole interview just about gear, because Tori and I are both kind of passionate gear type people. Usually we end up going for Army surplus first because it's cheap and it works. But I understand what you mean about some of that stuff where it's like, this gear's costs as much as a small car.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And it doesn't have to. And that's part of what my passion is. I've been in the industry, in the outdoor industry running my own retail store for, like, as I mentioned, for 14 years. And I really realized that behind the scenes, the gear is great that the big companies make. The issue is the markup and the distribution model. So let's say you and I make a jacket for $100. We sell it to the retailer for $200, and the retailer then sells it to the consumer for $400. And you think, oh my God, that's crazy. But when you get involved in the business and you realize all the layers of, as a retailer, I had staff, I had rent, I had cost. We were barely making a profit as a business because of it's very costly. And then things have to go on sale, and then you have promotions, and it just didn't work. And it didn't work for me, and it didn't work for the customer, because you're saying, well, here's $400 you have to pay for a jacket that cost $100 to make. This is the antiquated distribution model. And that's why we've created our own gear and going direct to consumer with our own product that I designed, so that I can take that jacket that cost $100 and sell it for $249 versus $400. At the same time, putting more money into the materials, because I think big companies are driving down material costs because they want to add profit to the bottom line. I get it. But we as an industry, as an outdoor industry, should be putting more money into the raw materials so that they're more ethically sourced, that we can protect the environment in improved ways, and the manufacturing so that we can enhance the lifestyles of the people who are making the product. Who are running the sewing machines. We should actually be paying more for manufacturing, more for the materials, cutting out the middleman, which I was. I was the problem. It took me years to figure it out, and selling direct to the consumer, so that I can give you a down jacket that normally would cost $329. I can sell it to you for $199, and pay more to have that jacket made. That's what I see as a retail revolution that's happening, and my little company is a part of it.
That's cool.
So you said you went from the extreme, from Everest to going through the desert with the temperature. Can you tell us about your camel trek through the desert?
Sure. Again, it was inspired by a book in one way. Sir Wilfrid Thesiger, a British explorer, had traveled in 1946 on camel from Salalah in Oman to Abu Dhabi in the UAE, sort of a deadbeat north through Saudi Arabia, across what's known as the empty quarter. Empty for good reason. It's just this monstrous and amazing ocean of sand. And that journey inspired me. And I think also, after having spent so much time in cold, vertical, mountainous environments, I was excited to try something different where I was totally out of my own element. Again, that going back to that idea of a richness of experience. If we constantly do what we are good at, there is a wonderful value in pursuing mastery, indeed, but there's an equally wonderful value in pursuing something where we're entirely incompetent. That learning curve can be quite exciting and rewarding, and I think it really expands one's knowledge. So maybe you're a good paddler, but now it's time to think about a through hike, or maybe you're a phenomenal hiker, but what would it be like to doing a multi-day paddle? Just opening, a lot of skills are transferable, and I think people who are skilled in bushcraft are able to, are keen anyway, or should be keen to try new things. So the desert was that. It was a wonderful journey of 1,400 kilometers in 40 days across an ocean of sand, and it was really, really hard.
Yeah, we can sort of kind of that resonates with us as well. Tori and I have been paddlers and hikers, and now our thing is we're kind of getting into dog sledding a little bit. So now we are surrounded by dogs and waiting for the cold weather, which has finally arrived to take the dogs out. So that's been a new adventure for the two of us as well.
Wow, good for you.
So now if someone was interested in reaching out to you, they're inspired by your stories, or they're asking for, business mentorship or whatever the things that they want to inquire about, how would someone get in touch with you and reach you?
And I'm quite happy to share. So I'd be honored if somebody wanted to chat about things. I've always thought, the best thing you can do is share everything you know. Knowledge is one thing, execution is something else. So I've been lucky in my life to have bumped into some people who are also very generous with their experience. And I'm happy to reciprocate and exchange that. So if I can be helpful to anybody in any way, I'm happy to be. So, there's a couple ways. I have my Twitter account, JC_Climbs. You can go to our webpage, liveoutthere.com. And, jump in there and comment, or on the contact us. You could also go to my own little webpage, jamieclarke.com. So there's multiple ways of getting a hold of me. And if you have any questions or ideas, or you want to try a piece of our gear and give me some feedback on how it needs to be better, I'm all for it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate your time out of your day and coming on to the Barefoot Bushcraft Radio Show. And there's some great, the show will, of course, again, it's available around the web to all our listeners. And we appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Wilf. And Tori, keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.